Hey guys, tonight we're setting out on a journey across the Sahara, not just to witness an empire, but to walk beside the dust and gold and slow-burning power of a king you may have heard of, but never quite met properly, Mansa Musa. You'll stand at the edge of an empire before it fully knows itself. You'll smell the clay ovens trace your fingers across salt bricks and feel coins press into your palm that could crumble economies across continents. This story doesn't shout, it glimmers like distant light off a caravan far down the trade road. And you're in it now. Just one warning, this story spans deserts, dynasties, and more gold than a dragon's vault. If you wandered in without water, a good attitude, or some decent sandals, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're up curious and comfortably horizontal, drop your location and what time it is. Where you're listening from in the comments. I love knowing who I'm walking with. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You enter Mali the same way most people do, not from a map, but from a rumor. A whisper, something about gold in the dust, gold under clay, gold, walking around with servants fanning it. No one tells you exactly where the empire begins, but the wind does. It starts with heat, thick rippling heat that wavers above the horizon like someone's trying to erase the road ahead with a trembling hand. You trudge down a dry track between camel bones and the husks of old grain baskets. Even the wind sounds tired. Then the smell hits you. Not bad, not sweet, just unmistakable. Salt. The good kind, the traded kind. The kind hauled in slabs the size of pillows on the backs of groaning camels. And it's everywhere. You crest a dune and spot your first town. Maybe town is generous. It's more of a clot of huts and tents tangled around a narrow well. A woman waves you over. She has no shoes, only ankles stained red from clay and dust. She offers you a calabash of water and points to the horizon. There, she says, that's where he comes from. That's where the king watches the wind. You ask who she means. She just laughs. You'll know. And you do. 2 days later, the wind shifts. You feel it first in your teeth like grit caught behind memory. Then you see it, a single rider cutting through the heat. He doesn't look important, doesn't even wear gold. But people step out of his way like the ground beneath him might be sacred. You follow him, because of course you do. He leads you to a marketplace unlike anything you've seen. No tents, just shade and shouting and music made from bones and string. There are fish wrapped in palm leaves, slabs of salt as smooth as polished floors, and something that smells like roasted goat dipped in honey and regret. People carry coins the size of your thumb discs, of gold soft at the edges. No markings, no stamps, just value pure and arrogant. You ask someone where they come from. Musa, they say. Where else? The name hangs heavy. You walk on into the maze of trade until you find yourself beside a stall covered in red cloth. The man behind it leans forward and whispers without asking your name. You want to know how it started. You nod. And so he tells you, softly, like he's afraid the dust might carry the words too far. There was a king before him, he says. Abu Bakari, ambitious, restless, wanted to find the edge of the ocean. You blink. The edge. He nods. He built ships, real ones, sent them west into the sea. Some say they returned, most say they didn't. But one ship came back without the king. You feel the breeze change again. So Musa, you start. Was chosen, the man says, appointed as regent, then crowned. No horns, no ceremony, just a man handed a kingdom that half believed in oceans and half believed in gold. You leave the stall and walk toward the palace, not because you know the way, but because the path clears for you. The palace isn't a tower, it's not even especially tall. It rises from the ground like it grew there, wide, shaded its walls dusted with crushed seashell and the scent of incense. You don't knock. No one does. Inside the floor is sanded smooth, the air is cooler, and seated at the far end, not on a throne, but on a mat of dyed wool, is him, Mansa Musa. He looks up. Not young, not old, skin like polished mahogany, eyes that do not ask but measure. He doesn't blink often, doesn't need to. You bow. He nods once, then gestures, and just like that you sit beside him. He says little. You notice his hands steady, wide, calloused in places. He holds a single coin between two fingers, not looking at it, just letting it catch the filtered light. You ask if it's real. He smiles, too real. You ask how much it's worth. He shrugs, enough to break a city, not enough to feed it. Historians still argue whether Mansa Musa fully understood the scale of his wealth, or whether he played down its danger out of wisdom or pride. What's certain, he inherited more than gold. He inherited a crossroads, salt books, trade, belief, power, and heat. Always the heat. You leave the palace late, the air heavy with burning myrrh. Outside, people are gathering for something. You don't know what. A boy explains the king's going on hajj. You ask how far. He says farther than the sky. And so you wait, because something is beginning. And it has gold in its mouth and dust in its voice. And you've just stepped inside it. You don't see the crown. Not at first. There's no trumpet, no drum roll, no dramatic handover in the courtyard. The story of Mansa Musa becoming king of Mali doesn't crash like thunder, it settles in like nightfall. One moment, he's a man asked to hold the kingdom's hand while its ruler sails off into oceanic riddles. The next, he is the kingdom. And you're there, just inside the perimeter of power. Close enough to smell incense curling through clay halls, far enough not to trip over royal secrets. You keep to the shadows of walls that breathe with heat. And you listen. Mali's palace isn't like the marble dreams of Rome or the stone obsessions of Egypt. No, this one is made of earth, literally. Sun-baked mud, reinforced with timber bones, shaped lovingly by hands that knew how to build shade and silence. On the day Musa is officially crowned, you walk past a courtyard where an old woman sweeps dust into neat rows. She doesn't stop when Musa walks past her. She bows slightly, yes, but doesn't stop. That's how you know he's truly king. When the people closest to the ground nod instead of kneeling, something has shifted. Inside, the air feels heavier now, not from heat but from expectation. The throne is still the same, a wide mat woven with red and gold thread, surrounded by cushions stuffed with camel hair. Musa sits cross-legged, his feet bare, his gaze steady. Someone offers him a leather pouch filled with soft gold coins, genuine, warm to the touch. He waves it away. Later, he murmurs, "You're close enough to hear." A group of advisors stands behind him. Some you recognize: the salt merchant's cousin, the imam with the saffron turban, a former caravan master who now talks more than he listens. One of them reads a scroll out loud, news from Gao, or maybe Jenye. Something about cattle theft or taxes unpaid. Musa listens without blinking, then asks, "Did they offer tribute last season?" "They did," he says, the scroll reader. "Then their family," Musa says, "send grain, not threats." The advisors blink, a few frown, but no one argues, and the scroll is rolled shut. That's how you learn the way he governs, not through decrees carved in stone, but through tone, through timing, through silences held just long enough for you to question your own thoughts. Historians still argue whether Musa inherited his wisdom or forged it. Some say his lineage made him calm, others say being appointed rather than born into kingship gave him patience. Either way, his presence expands without filling the room. He walks the market later that week, not disguised but quiet. Dressed in indigo, unadorned, his feet wrapped in leather that's clearly been worn and repaired. You follow, pretending to admire a basket of dried dates. You watch him greet a potter. Not formally, gently. He asks how many hands built the new kiln. She says 6. He nods, says the word 6 like it means 100. That night you sit with the scribes as they transcribe trade routes and rainfall records. One draws a line in the sand with his stylus. This, he says, is how Musa sees Mali. Not a border, a bridge. You nod slowly, pretending you understand. But you don't, not yet. The next day, the court receives envoys from the North Berber traders from Takeda. They bring cloth and questions. One asks about the king's position on copper tariffs. Musa lifts one eyebrow. "Position," he says, "we're not dancers, let's talk plainly." The room shifts. The Berber swallows hard. Musa grins, then claps the man on the back. "Sit, we'll trade news before metal. Later, over roasted yams and honey-sweetened tea, you learn more." Musa doesn't believe in riches that don't move. Gold, he says, is a fool's burden if it stays buried. And buried it is. Mali sits on wealth deeper than wells, richer than kings. But Musa doesn't hoard it. Not yet. He listens, maps, builds. He walks the edge of the Niger River with his chief architect, a man from Timbuktu, who once shaped homes out of riverbank mud, and now imagines mosques. They stop often, not to admire the view but to test the soil. This one holds the architect, says, pressing a clump between his fingers. Musa nods, then it can bear stories. Because that's what he wants: buildings that whisper when you walk through them. Buildings that say you matter, even if your name never reaches a scroll. You walk the fields too. You see the irrigation channels widened, the herders consulted, the grain stores catalogued like treasure. Musa does not shout, he inventories. You hear him laugh once, just once in the courtyard, when a goat steals a minister's sandal. He calls the goat inspector of sandals for the rest of the week. He even lets it sit beside him during Judgment Day. And yes, there is judgment. On Fridays, the square fills with those seeking resolution land disputes, family betrayals, debts unpaid. Musa listens to each. Sometimes he rules. Sometimes he says, "You already know." Sometimes he asks what a grandmother would decide. They usually get it right. At night you lie beneath the same roof listening to the hum of late conversation. Gold doesn't speak, but it pulls voices toward it. The king has no crown, but his name is already growing fat in the mouths of poets. You hear one say he will drown us in coins. Another replies, yes, and we will learn to swim. You wake to gold in the air, not the loud kind, no coins clinking in sacks, no treasure being poured across stone. No, this gold is in the dust caught in sunlight, swirling between people like gossip. It coats your skin as you walk through Musa's growing empire. It's in the way traders weigh things with their eyes, in the way the wind carries the scent of wet clay and roasted dates. It's not flashy, it's everywhere. Mali under Musa is turning golden. Not overnight, but steadily. You walk through the heart of Niani, the capital. It's a city that breathes in circles. Traders arrive, trade, gossip, and leave. Cattle are moved from field to field with a rhythm that sounds suspiciously like music. And everywhere beneath it all is gold stored in reed-walled homes, sewn into hems ground fine into dust, to be stirred into ink for documents that only a dozen people in the world can read. You pass one such scribe now squinting over a manuscript with a blackened thumb from too much lamp smoke. He's muttering. You pause. He says, "Do you know how much this scroll cost?" You shake your head. He points at the gold lettering. A fortune. And the ink is camel bile and iron soot. If I sneeze, I lose a month's pay. You thank him silently for not sneezing. Musa has begun converting Mali's wealth into more than trade. He's investing it quietly in mines. Historians still argue whether Musa was the first African monarch to fuse Islamic learning with local oral traditions. Some say his interest in scholarship was strategic. Others think he just really liked books. Regardless, you see it now, shelves being built in clay-walled rooms, elders gathering in shaded courtyards to recite lineage traders, teaching sons to track gold's weight by the pitch it makes when dropped onto cloth. You visit the mint. It isn't what you expect. There are no machines, no forges roaring with fury, just patient hands. Men and women bent over small furnaces, melting gold into discs. They polish each one with a mixture of sand and oil, then weigh them on scales made of bone and wood. One woman offers you a freshly cooled coin. You hold it. It's heavy, and somehow soft. The edges aren't perfect, there's no face, no inscription. Just value, silent, undeniable. Musa walks through the mint once a week, not to oversee, to listen. He doesn't touch the coins, he watches the hands that shape them. One day he asks a young girl counting ingots, "How much is enough?" She shrugs. "When your goats are fat and your neighbors aren't hungry." He smiles like she's taught him something new. That evening, you attend a royal dinner. It's not what you expect either. There is food, grilled fish from the river millet, with spiced onions, bowls of fruit that smell like late summer. But the main attraction is the conversation. One man is arguing that gold is too easy. Anyone can trade it, he says. Salt is harder. It demands planning. A woman counters gold remembers where it's been. Salt forgets. They both turn to Musa. He's picking at a fig. He looks up. Salt builds friendships, he says. Gold builds myths. I'd like both if that's allowed. The table nods. Because what else can you do? Later that night, you wander into the lower city where torches flicker above doorways and children chase fireflies through dusty alleys. You hear drums not for dance but for rhythm. A group of men is loading gold bars into hollow logs. You stop. One nods at you. Tax shipment, he explains, northbound. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Bandits don't rob logs. And he's right. Musa doesn't just spend gold. He moves it cleverly, silently. Through caravans in wax-sealed bags, sometimes in the bellies of goats fattened for long trips. Gold travels through Mali like breath through a flute, measured invisible essential. You learn the rhythm. Gold enters as tribute. It's weighed recorded, then disappears. Where? No one ever says. Some claim Musa stores it in caves, hidden in the Dogon cliffs. Others believe it's buried beneath sacred trees' roots, fed on treasure. One merchant whispers of a hidden chamber beneath the mosque in Gao, its walls gilded in silence. You start to believe all of them. Because the wealth is real, but the wealth never shows off. Not yet. And this is the moment where Musa begins to ask bigger questions. You catch part of a conversation one morning. He's speaking with an older scholar who traveled from Egypt. I want to go to Mecca, Musa says. The scholar nods slowly. Alone, he asks. Musa laughs. Is any king ever truly alone? You see it then. The weight of it. He's not thinking small anymore. Not about cattle or salt routes or coin weights. He's thinking in pilgrimage, in reputation, in building a name so large it doesn't need translation. The scholar says it will be expensive. Musa only replies good. That night in a quiet hallway, you see him unwrapping a cloth bundle. Inside a map. Not of Mali, not just. It stretches east, across desert, through oases, through cities with names that smell like cinnamon and sandstorms. Cairo, Medina, Mecca. He runs his finger along the route. You don't speak, but your heartbeat stutters anyway, because you know what's coming. He's going to walk it. Or rather, he's going to carry Mali across it. And you're going too, because you've seen how he holds a coin, and you're curious how he'll spend it. You wake before dawn to the sound of hooves and the shuffle of sandals. The city isn't sleeping anymore, it's loading. Wooden carts groan under sacks of millet coils, of rope jugs, of date wine baskets, of cloth so tightly packed you'd think they were carved, not woven. And gold, not piles of it, no. That would be crass. But bundles cleverly wrapped quiet, stacked like bedding, disguised like blessings. Mansa Musa is going on pilgrimage, and he's not walking alone. You are part of the crowd now. Just one among hundreds, maybe thousands. Servants, traders, warriors, scribes, cooks, camel guides, goat herders, poets, dancers, imams, and a handful of children whose job seems to be clapping at the right moments. Everyone has a place, except you, which is how you find yourself drifting. You pass a line of camels being rubbed with perfumed oil. A woman in indigo stands on tiptoes to reach behind one's ears. Even a camel should smell holy, she says. Farther on, a man adjusts the golden bit in his horse's mouth, muttering that the Sultan of Cairo better see the shine before he hears the name. And behind him someone else mutters, "If he doesn't go blind from the gold, we'll refund him." Mali has begun to gleam. Musa is not just walking to Mecca, he is announcing himself. Historians still argue about the numbers, how many people went with him. Some say 60,000, others say 8,000. What they agree on is this: the caravan was unforgettable. You see the first stretch of it as the sun finally rises. Camels, camels everywhere, with silk saddle cloths, with tiny bells tied to their knees, with gold flasks strapped to their sides. One carries a rolled-up map as tall as a man. Another bundles of incense wrapped in goatskin, and walking beside them Musa. He's dressed plainly for now, a white robe, leather sandals, a turban the color of moonlight. But his eyes, those shine. The journey begins quietly. The city disappears behind you without fanfare. No one waves, no horns, just footprints pressed into dry earth and the growing rhythm of thousands of feet in motion. You walk beside a woman who carries a box of writing tools, reed pens, ink stones, folded parchment. She offers you one. For notes, she says, or regrets. You keep it. The first days are dry, the sun unrelenting. The desert doesn't care about your faith, it only wants your water. You drink sparingly, eat with strangers, sleep under stars so sharp they feel like they could cut you. And yet no one complains, because every evening Musa walks among the tents. No guards, no entourage, just a bowl of dates in his hand, offering one to anyone he passes. He listens to goat herders talk about hoof rot. He watches a boy try to teach a camel to bow. He offers a quiet nod to an imam mid-prayer, then keeps walking. And people see this. They notice. One man whispers to you he doesn't act like he owns Mali. You reply he acts like Mali owns him. By the second week, the caravan reaches an oasis town, bustling with merchants, beggars, bandits pretending to be priests. They don't expect much from visitors until Musa's camels arrive, and then the gold begins. He pays for water like it's wine, pays for shade like it's land, pays a beggar with a coin so heavy it drops through his bowl. The town changes instantly. Children follow the caravan shouting his name. Shopkeepers fight to give away food hoping for another payment. A local elder warns Musa, "You're breaking the town." Musa replies, "Then it was too fragile to begin with." You move on, but the town buzzes behind you for days. The gold isn't just money, it's message. Musa is building an empire of impression. And when you reach the next oasis, people already know. They've heard. They bow before he dismounts, offer gifts before being asked. He accepts them with grace, then gives back double. At night, around a fire made from sandalwood someone said smelled expensive, you sit with a storyteller from Tagaza. He chuckles, then says, "This hajj is less about God, more about being seen by him." You raise an eyebrow. He adds, "and by everyone else too." Because that's the truth. Musa is devout, But he is also strategic. He knows the route to Mecca is lined with kingdoms, judges, scholars, and potential enemies. And he plans to make them all allies or admirers before they ever see his throne. You reach the edge of the Egyptian border as heat warps the road ahead. You can smell Cairo from miles away, smoke, spices, and the nervous sweat of anticipation. You ask someone what the plan is. A merchant grins. Cairo's going to break, he says, and we're going to spend it back together. You enter Cairo sideways. Not literally, though the streets are narrow enough to make you wonder, but spiritually, emotionally, economically. Because Musa doesn't just arrive, he glides in like a golden wind and unbuttons the city's expectations with the ease of a man who knows his worth and enjoys reminding others of it. The caravan reaches the city's outskirts in a shimmering line of heat and hooves. Hundreds of camels, thousands of attendants, so much gold that it isn't stored, it's arranged, stacked like fruit, wrapped like figs, carried on silk cushions as if it might bruise. Cairo has seen power before, but not like this. You walk through the main gate behind a servant whose job is to hold nothing but a pillow embroidered with gold thread and embroidered again with actual gold. The guards don't stop you. They're too busy trying to blink the glitter out of their eyes. Within a day, the whole city is buzzing. You hear it in the tea houses where old men mutter over dice games. You hear it from the rooftop laundry workers who gossip between wet linens. You hear it in the silence of the merchants who raise their prices without being asked. Because when Mansa Musa spends, it rains. The scholars are the first to arrive. They approach like cautious cats, respectful, curious, mildly suspicious. They're used to wealthy visitors, but not this kind of weight. Musa offers them gold like it's sand. He funds mosques. He restores schools. He gives gifts that are technically not bribes, but let's just say they leave fingers jingling and doors very, very open. The Sultan of Egypt finally agrees to meet. This is the moment. Historians still debate the exact details, how formal it was, who bowed first, what words were exchanged. What's consistent is the result. The Sultan's court would remember the meeting long after the tea cooled and the rugs were rolled up. You stand at the back of the audience hall, pressed shoulder to shoulder with dozens of servants, nobles, and scribes. The room is tiled with geometric precision. The ceilings hang heavy with oil lamps. The Sultan reclines with the ease of someone who expects worship, and Musa stands, tall, still, wearing plain white save for a sash of embroidered green that catches the light just enough to remind you this man has options. The Sultan greets him. Musa nods. And for a moment nothing happens. The court holds its breath. The sand outside seems to wait. Then Musa speaks, not loudly, not grandly, but with the calm of someone who knows he doesn't need to prove anything. "I've walked far," he says. The Sultan leans forward. "We've heard." "I bring greetings," Musa continues, "and gold enough to bless your grandchildren." The Sultan chuckles. He doesn't believe it. Yet, you spend the next few weeks watching the city change. The gold flows, like water from a cracked jar. Musa pays for lodging with bars of gold. He tips camel cleaners with nuggets. He buys manuscript spices, copper slaves, and the rarest of perfumes then gives most of it away. And Cairo buckles. The markets swell, prices warp. Gold loses its meaning briefly. You try to buy a loaf of bread one day and the baker won't take your coin. Too shiny, he says, makes people nervous. By the second week, Cairo's economy is dizzy. By the third, it's staggering. A merchant throws his hands in the air after selling a single bolt of cloth. "I am rich," he cries, "and I hate it." You step outside and find Musa sipping a mint tea in the shade, utterly unbothered. When asked if he regrets the chaos, he shrugs. "Gold is only dangerous when it's still," he says. He pauses. Now Cairo knows it breathes. He commissions scholars to return with him to Mali, architects, jurists, poets. He listens carefully to a blind imam who recites 20 pages of hadith from memory. He hires him on the spot. "Your words don't need eyes," Musa says. And the imam nods, tears glinting in sightless sockets. One morning, you visit a mosque being rebuilt with Musa's funding. The lead mason shows you a design drawn in fine sand on the floor, a blend of local arches and Sahelian mud-stamped motifs. You ask why the mix. He replies, because when gold enters a place, it doesn't just weigh, it melts. The day Musa finally departs Cairo, the city exhales, a long, confused, grateful, aching breath. Some cry, some cheer, some just count their coins and wonder what they're worth now. You leave with the caravan as it begins to move again, bells jingling on camel legs, hooves grinding Cairo's gold dust back into the road. You glance back, once expecting to see the skyline dimmed. But no, Cairo glows brighter, not because it's richer, but because it's been seen. And Mansa Musa, he walks at the front of the caravan again, in white again, quiet again, thoughtful. You ask him if the journey's almost over. He smiles. We've barely begun. Because Mecca still waits, and the world, it seems, is only just starting to listen. The road from Cairo to Mecca is not kind. It winds like a story that doesn't want to end, dipping into dry gulches and rising over stony ridges where even the camels seem to whisper complaints through their teeth. The sun becomes a constant hum in your bones, and the air smells like prayers that never quite cooled. And yet you walk, because Musa walks. You wonder sometimes why he doesn't ride more often. He has horses, camels, a litter carved with gold and draped in shade. But he walks. His steps are measured even when the sand burns. His eyes scan the horizon even when there's nothing to see. And his lips always moving, sometimes in prayer, sometimes in thought, sometimes in both. You pass through smaller cities, oases with names that sound like rainfall when spoken right. You see palm groves, wells lined with stories, markets built from faded cloth and pure stubbornness. Everywhere the caravan moves, it leaves more than tracks. It leaves gold. Still, always. In Medina, Musa doesn't make a scene. He prays. He listens. He gives. You watch him hand a gold coin to a boy with one arm and no shoes. He kneels to do it, looks the boy in the eyes, says nothing. The boy smiles like his bones remember it. One afternoon you rest beneath a fig tree beside an elderly scholar from Andalusia who's joined the caravan. His voice is soft, brittle as old parchment. "This king of yours, he says he is either mad or saint." You raise an eyebrow, or both, he admits. Historians still debate what Musa hoped to achieve on the Hajj. Some say it was pure faith, a desire to fulfill the pillar of Islam. Others say it was strategy, diplomacy, wrapped in devotion. But when you watch him kneel on dusty stone and press his forehead to the earth, it feels simple. He believes. And belief, it turns out, travels well. When you reach Mecca, the caravan doesn't pour in like a river. It settles gently like morning fog. The holy city breathes around you, tight streets, minarets climbing like carved prayers, the scent of musk and old stone. You hear dozens of languages, see calligraphy stretched across cloth, glimpse faces that seem shaped by desert wind and sea salt. You expect Musa to announce himself. He doesn't. He prays. For hours, for days. You find yourself doing it too, even if you don't know the words. Because there's something about the way the city moves, soft, purposeful, ancient. You begin to understand that Mecca isn't about arrival. It's about return. One evening you sit with a group of pilgrims around a fire. A man from Persia plays a quiet song on a reed flute. Another from Yemen tells stories of stars and lost cities. A woman from Syria describes the way snow looks on old stone. Then someone asks what Musa has brought. You brace yourself. Another coin shower. A golden feast. But he's already moving before you answer. He steps into the circle. He carries nothing except a small worn book. He kneels. And he reads. Not loudly, not grandly, just a verse, then another. You don't recognize them all. But the way he speaks them slowly, steadily, you believe them anyway. When he finishes, the fire has burned down low. The man from Persia sighs. That, he says, was the richest thing we've heard all week. The next morning, Musa is invited to visit several of the city's most revered scholars. You accompany him. The meetings are tense, not unfriendly but watchful. They ask questions about Mali's jurisprudence, about the lineage of his advisors, about how much of the Quran his people know. You feel the room tighten. But Musa doesn't flinch. He recites verses, he explains rulings, he shares sayings of his grandfather, some of which rhyme so beautifully even the stone-faced jurists smile despite themselves. He's not defensive. He's rooted. Islam, he says, is not new in Mali, but it is now better lit. Later he walks alone through the courtyard of a mosque, so old the stones seem tired of holding stories. You follow quietly. He pauses beside a basin of water and dips his hands in. Do you think they respect us, now you ask? He shrugs. I didn't come for their respect. A beat. I came so God would remember my name. That night he orders the distribution of gold once more. Not to scholars, to orphans, to the sick, to beggars who didn't ask. You carry a basket yourself. A woman takes a coin from you and kisses your hand. I'll never forget him, she whispers. You think of Cairo, of how gold broke the city. But here, it heals. Mecca changes him. Not loudly, not obviously. But you see it in the way he listens longer, prays slower, smiles with the kind of weight that isn't tired, just full. The return journey begins not with fanfare, but with a whisper. He rises early, faces the road, and begins walking home. But this time something follows him that wasn't there before. Reputation, echo, legend. You don't just walk beside a king anymore. You walk beside a name that cities will one day bow to. And Musa, he just walks, still barefoot, still humming, still letting the gold trail gently behind him. You walk home beneath a heavier sky, not with dread, just with distance. You've been to the center of faith, heard prayers echo through stone-felt dust between your toes that billions of others have worn down before you. But now the direction has reversed. Every step away from Mecca feels like peeling paint off a story you weren't finished reading. Mansa Musa doesn't seem burdened by it. He walks at the front of the caravan as always, not leading so much as guiding. His eyes scan the horizon like he's reading a scroll only he can see. You pass again through towns that once gasped at your gold. They don't now. Now they nod in recognition. Some bow, some offer dates. Some just stand with arms folded and eyes reverent. Musa nods back. He doesn't need to dazzle anymore. He's already a constellation. Somewhere in the endless beige stretch between oases, you overhear a trader mutter, "He went a man, he returns an idea." The caravan grows quieter the closer it gets to Mali. Not somber, just thoughtful, as if everyone knows they've seen something they'll spend the rest of their lives trying to explain. And Musa, he is already planning. You learn this the night he calls a quiet meeting under a crescent moon. Only a dozen people attend. You're one of them. He sits on a rug with no guards, no scrolls, just a fire and silence thick enough to chew. "I want to build," he says finally. Not loudly, not asking permission. He begins listing names: Timbuktu, Gao, Jenne, places you've heard spoken like myths. He mentions scholars by name, teachers, astronomers, poets, and architects. Especially architects. "I want them to learn from Mecca," he says. "But speak in mud." You blink. He clarifies stone is for remembering. Mud is for living. Mali is alive. You understand. Sort of. A few days later, the caravan arrives in Mali. But the Mali you return to is not the Mali you left. Something has shifted. Timbuktu, once a dusty trading post where goats outnumbered books, now buzzes. Merchants are already retelling your journey. One man claims he was personally invited by Musa to recite poetry at the Kaaba. He wasn't. But you don't correct him. Because myth is faster than memory. Musa doesn't rest, not for long. He immediately summons builders. Not the kind with hammers, the kind with vision. You walk with him through the outskirts of Timbuktu, where he points at patches of land that to you look like nothing more than cracked dirt and goat droppings. Here, he says, will stand a mosque, there a madrasa, further on a library. He envisions buildings that won't just hold people, but hold thinking. Buildings that speak when entered, that remember the past and write it forward. The architects look nervous. One of them, a man from Andalusia, asks, "What kind of stone?" Musa replies, "The kind that crumbles with dignity." And so the building begins. Not fast, not always straight, but steadily. You pass a courtyard where boys shovel sand into woven baskets. A girl balances bricks on her head like a queen. A woman paints a sunburst onto a future doorway using only her thumb. Someone hangs an empty scroll on a wall and writes a single word, begin. Books arrive next, not in crates but in arms. Scholars return with texts copied by hand. Histories, theologies, astronomical charts, philosophy treatises. You help unroll one scroll and catch the scent of Cairo still clinging to the ink. The mosques rise like slow-growing trees. The walls are smoothed by hand. Timber ribs stretch upward. Palm beams curl like held breath. And the doors, they don't creak. They chant quietly each time they open. The people come, some to pray, some to argue, some to stare at the newness and say it won't last. Musa hears them. He builds anyway. You walk through a new madrasa and hear a debate about whether the stars pull at us or merely remind us of pulling. You sit in a library where someone translates ancient Arabic into a Malinka song. You pass a group of children quizzing each other on the names of prophets using pebbles in the dust. One child asks what Musa reads. You answer everything he hasn't built yet. At night, Musa walks the halls barefoot. No guards, no ceremony. He stops to ask a teacher how many students she has. She says, too many. He replies, then you're doing it right. He funds her school for 10 years. Later, you sit with him on the rooftop of the largest mosque in Timbuktu, watching moonlight fall across the rooftops like powdered gold. You ask if this is the Mali he dreamed of. He doesn't answer at first, then says it's the Mali they will dream of. You look out over the city. The lamps flicker like stars. The dust sleeps. And below, in rooms lined with clay and text, minds are waking. You ride out past the edges of the city where the maps begin to fray. The air feels drier here, the wind less curious, more suspicious. The color of the sand changes subtly, more iron, less gold. Even the camels grunt differently. They've sensed it too. You're heading toward Mali's borders, the outer ribs of the empire, the places where Musa's name travels faster than his coin. You're not alone. Musa sends you with a small diplomatic party, an imam, a map reader, 2 warriors with eyes that never seem to blink, and a young man named Sori, who insists he's only here for the goats. He's lying. He watches everything. Your mission: listen, observe, and maybe remind the edge that the center remembers it. The first village you reach isn't much mud walls, dried calabashes, hanging like sleepy ornaments, a well with 1 handle and 1,000 opinions. The chief welcomes you with flatbread and questions. He asks about Timbuktu like it's a rumor. You tell him it's a fact. He frowns. We heard they were teaching women to read. You nod. They are. He grunts. What next, goats with ink pots? You smile. He doesn't. But he invites you to sit, and that's enough. That evening, you attend Judgment Circle beneath the village's lone baobab. Disputes are voiced in low tones: a missing camel, a cursed salt slab, a boy who swears a spirit stole his sandals. The imam listens. Sori listens harder. No coins change hands. But Musa's name is mentioned, not like a title, like a spell. Musa said no salt taxes. Musa says gold must move. Musa forgave the thief in Jenne. You realize something: his rules have traveled farther than his voice. Historians still argue whether Musa's influence truly reached the empire's edges. Some say the south remained more animist than Islamic, more tribal than imperial. But here, on this cracked plain, you hear his name used in both reverence and resistance. A boy kicks at the dust beside you. He's wrapped in goat hide with a pouch of talismans strung around his neck. "Do you think he's real?" he asks. You pause. "Who?" He shrugs. "The king, the walking gold man." You look at your feet, still coated in the journey's dust. "Very real," you say. He considers it, then runs off laughing. The next morning, you reach a salt caravan mid-journey. Dozens of camels, each stacked with slabs heavier than promises. The traders wear leather veils and speak a dialect that cuts like wind through date trees. One offers you a deal. 10 slabs for 1 Musa coin, he says. You raise an eyebrow. He grins. Not for the gold, for the idea. You trade. Later, your party passes a border town built along the cliffs. It clings to the rock like a story afraid of being forgotten. Here, Musa's presence is thinner. The traders cheat more. The guards smile less. The taxes seem heavier. The local chief insists all visitors pay tribute regardless of title. You present Musa's seal. He laughs. "I have a seal," he says, "on a shelf with 6 others. The warriors shift. The imam coughs. But Musa's instructions were clear: no threats, just memory. So you leave behind a scroll, a letter in soft ink, written by Musa himself. It begins with "May your shade be long," and ends with, "If you doubt I exist, walk toward me." You don't know if he'll read it, but someone will. As you travel back toward the heart of Mali, you pass an oasis where children splash in shallow water. One girl plays with a coin, spinning it, balancing it on her toe. You ask where she got it. She shrugs. "A man on a camel dropped it. He said it was lucky." You smile, because it probably is. That night, your party camps under a sky cracked wide with stars. The imam tells a story about a king who tried to name all the winds. The map reader snores. Sorry sharpens a knife he hasn't needed. You lie awake thinking about edges, how they resist, how they remember, how sometimes they send more back than they receive. You think about Musa, how he governs not just through wealth, but through whispers, and how every time someone says his name, the empire redraws itself. You fall asleep with the taste of salt on your tongue and the thought that empires aren't circles, they're ripples, and you've just walked one. You return to the center, not through gates, but through smells. Fresh bread rising from clay ovens, papyrus ink drying in the corners of script houses, sweat sand and the faint sweet smoke of incense clinging to old brick. You walk into it like a memory that missed you, and the memory wraps its arms around you tight and warm and a little dusty. Musa is already waiting, not on a throne, not under a canopy, but seated cross-legged in the courtyard of a mosque that wasn't there when you left. He doesn't look surprised to see you. "Did the borders speak?" he asks, not looking up from the scroll he's annotating. You nod. They argued. They remembered. He smiles faintly. "Good. That means they're still alive." You sit beside him. No fanfare, no guards. And in the fading afternoon sun, you begin to notice what has changed while you were gone. The streets feel slower, more deliberate. People speak in full sentences now, not just how much and when, but why and how long has it been this way, and did you read what the Imam said? The children walk differently too, less wandering, more following. They follow teachers. You pass a schoolroom shaded by thatch and thick with dust, where a dozen kids are reciting verse, not from the Quran this time, from an herbal manuscript. You catch phrases like camel bile infusion and tamarind poultice for fever. A boy raises his hand. I heard someone once treated a burn with mashed lizard and honey. Is that true? The teacher smiles. Only if you want the wound to tell jokes forever. The children laugh. You move on. At the mosque, you notice sandals lined up more carefully than before. Even the poorest pair, stitched from frayed leather and thread, has been placed gently on the rack, not tossed. Inside the sermon isn't fire, it's light. The Imam speaks not of sin, but of questions. How many stars does it take, he asks, before you forget where the moon is? No one answers, but everyone listens. Historians often overlook daily life in golden empires. They trace trade routes and military victories, but forget the boy who wrote his first poem under a neem tree, or the woman who used cowrie shells to explain counting to her daughter. Musa didn't. He built the outer walls, yes, but inside he watered the small things. You follow a thread of curiosity to a grain market. There, amid sacks of millet and bundles of rice straw, you meet a woman holding court over a chalkboard. She teaches math with dried beans and goat bones. Her audience is half illiterate, but fully engaged. Musa appears beside you again, silent until someone asks a question she can't answer. He steps forward, draws a spiral, says trade is like this, and leaves. You ask him later why he intervened. I wasn't correcting her, he says. I was reminding the question that it's worth asking. You begin to notice other shifts. The city smells of ink. The markets now sell papyrus scrolls beside onions. One scribe is offering custom verses of gratitude, and a beggar is reciting hadith in exchange for lentils. You spend a day walking with a young scholar who studied in Cairo and returned with too many ideas and not enough patience. He sighs. They think I'm showing off. You shake your head. You're just not translating yet. Later, you see him with a circle of farmers using river pebbles to explain rainfall predictions. They nod slowly. One claps, and a boy in the back mutters, "So that's why the goats scream early in the season." Progress. In a courtyard shaded by woven reed, you join a study circle. It includes a baker who never learned to write, a widow with 7 children, a mute man who communicates in sand drawings, and a girl who keeps correcting the pronunciation of the word library. No one leaves, especially not Musa, who sits at the edge listening, sometimes with his eyes closed, as if absorbing the words through skin alone. One evening, you accompany him to a celebration. Not a coronation, a book festival. A book festival. People come from Gao, from Walata, from places with names that sound like songs. They bring scrolls in bundles tied with strips of dyed cloth. They bring ink stories, guesses. One child brings a question written on a palm leaf. How do we know if we're dreaming someone else's dream? A teacher responds, we ask. Musa just nods, his eyes shining. You remember when Mali felt ruled by coin. Now it feels ruled by curiosity. At night under stars familiar and new, Musa walks barefoot across the stone of the library's future expansion. You ask him what he's thinking. He gestures to the sky. All of that, he says, is ours to read. But only if we remember to write too. He crouches, draws a line in the dust. You don't conquer ignorance with gold, he says. You starve it with questions. You sit beside him, the air warm, the city humming. And you think, maybe this is how empires stay gold. Not through war, but through wonder. The masons rise before the sun. You can hear them long before the city wakes, shovels biting clay water, being sloshed into wooden buckets. Soft voices debating wall thickness, as though discussing poetry. Dust hangs in the air, not like a problem, but like incense, sacred, necessary, constant. You join them. You're not much help. You drop a trowel, you mix the clay too wet, but no one minds. Because these aren't just builders, they're dreamers in sandals. Musa's architects have returned from across the desert with ideas sewn into their robes. Arches that cast perfect shade, stairwells that spiral like verses, roof beams shaped like prayer. But they're not just importing beauty, they're blending it. Mud meets geometry, Sahel meets script, and Mali Mali begins to look like a prayer spoken out loud. You stand in the shadow of the Jingareba Mosque as it rises. Timber poles jut from its walls, not for decoration, but for maintenance, so the walls can be re-smoothed every year by the same hands that worship inside them. A mason explains a mosque that doesn't ask for help becomes a ruin. You think about that. Then you help pass a bucket. Historians often credit Musa with importing Islamic architecture. But what they miss is how carefully he translated it. He didn't erase Mali's way of building, he gave it a new language. In the middle of the mosque's courtyard, Musa stands barefoot, tracing lines in the sand with a stick. Children gather curious. He turns to one and says, "If you could draw your soul, what shape would it be?" The boy thinks. "Like a well," he says finally. "Deep but full." Musa nods. "Then we'll build the door to match." You wander through the outer quarters of Timbuktu. Every few blocks a new structure rises, some large, some modest. A learning hall here, a bakery with geometric lattices there, a home with Quranic verses etched into the lintel. You begin to see it. The architecture isn't just for shelter. It teaches. It remembers. Each doorway is a threshold into identity. Each arch whispers of the pilgrimage. Each pillar hums with Cairo's echoes, but the mud is pure Mali. You visit a courtyard where plaster is being mixed with ash, pomegranate peel, and goat hair. A woman explains the ratio. Her son draws a camel into the drying wall. She doesn't stop him. You climb to the roof of the Sankore Madrasa as it nears completion. From there, the city stretches like a scroll, flat roofs, winding alleys, prayer towers, standing like punctuation marks across the skyline. Below, Musa is sitting with the lead builder. They're silent, both looking at a single clay brick. Musa says, Do you think the future will wonder if we meant it? The builder replies, only if we forget to smile when we shape it. You laugh but quietly, because you understand. That evening, you help light oil lamps for a dedication ceremony. People crowd into the mosque courtyard, some dressed in their finest linen, others barefoot carrying only questions. There's no speech, no coin giving, just one act. Musa steps forward and presses his palm into the wet clay of the final wall segment. A perfect print. He doesn't sign it, because the print is the signature. Later, back at the palace, you walk the new garden paths, a recent addition, Musa commissioned after seeing shaded courtyards in Medina. Mango trees have been planted. A small fountain trickles like it's dreaming of being a river. You sit. He joins you holding a handful of tiny clay figures made by children, goats, stars, mosques, even one lumpy version of Musa himself, smiling wider than his real face ever dares. He places them in the garden wall. I want them to be found, he says, by people who need to remember that children once saw us building. You nod. He turns to you. Do you know what's better than gold? You think he's going to say knowledge, but he says a shadow. You blink. He explains gold fades, stories bend, but shade, that's kindness you don't even have to name. And buildings that cast it last longer. The next morning, the masons are back at work before first light. And so are the storytellers, scribes, bakers, students and pilgrims who now call Timbuktu home. You watch as a child no more than 7 carries a bucket of sand to the mosque wall. She trips, sand spills. Musa walks over, kneels beside her. Together they scoop it back in. No one speaks. But you feel the story settling. Right here, into the clay. You wake to drums. Not the celebratory kind, not the ones that call dancers to the square or mark the start of prayer. These drums are lower, slower, meant not to wake bodies but minds. A diplomat arrives from across the Sahara. He comes on a lean camel, wrapped in layers of deep green, his face mostly hidden except for 2 eyes that have clearly seen too much sand. He carries no chest of tribute, no scroll sealed in wax, just a question. He kneels before Mansa Musa in a shaded colonnade and speaks 3 words. Who protects Mali? You're close enough to hear. Musa doesn't answer at first. He's finishing a passage of calligraphy, painting each letter like it's something that must be coaxed from the ink with patience. When he looks up, he only says, "The same who watches the dust." It's not evasive, it's precise, because protection isn't always armies. Sometimes it's alliances, sometimes it's memory, but sometimes it is also spears. You begin to notice new movement in the capital. Horsemen training in the fields at dawn. Blacksmiths forging not only hoes but hilts. Scholars drafting treaties beside messengers, mounting fresh camels. You ask a court advisor if there's trouble coming. She shrugs. There's always trouble. But sometimes it needs directions. You follow Musa on a diplomatic mission to Gao, where the river runs wider and the markets speak with multiple tongues. You travel with gifts, salt slabs, glass beads, manuscripts copied by hand and bound in leather that smells like thunderclouds. Ka receives you with polite indifference. Their chief is cautious. His people remember the days before Musa, when trade routes were wilder and justice was a sharp thing carried in a belt loop. They offer a feast. Musa brings a book. At the meal he reads aloud. Not scripture, not laws. A poem. About rivers, about memory, about borders that vanish in the rain. By the second verse, the chief is listening. By the end, he's reciting along. Afterward, the two men speak long into the night voices, low heads bent close, the space between them softening like wet clay. Musa doesn't demand allegiance. He gives presence. And the next morning, Gao lowers its taxes on Mali caravans. You pass through other regions too, less friendly, less poetic. One town refuses to open its gates. Another pretends not to hear you knocking. Musa doesn't press. He leaves behind stories instead, small coins etched with new verses, scrolls wrapped in indigo cloth messengers, trained not to persuade, but to ask good questions. And over time, the gates open. Historians still argue whether Musa expanded Mali's influence through diplomacy or divine luck. But you were there. You saw him plant presents like seeds, and you watched the borders bloom. Back in Timbuktu, you hear news from the East Egypt remembers. The Sultan has commissioned a poem in Musa's honor. In Andalusia, a scholar mentions him in a letter about economic theory. In Constantinople, someone asks aloud, "Where does Mali begin?" No one answers, but somewhere you know Musa is smiling. One evening, you walk beside him through the fields outside the city. The millet is tall. The wind is soft. He asks if you've ever seen an empire from underneath. You frown. He points to the base of a termite mound. Here, he says, it begins small, quiet, then it builds up. But everything above depends on the shape beneath. You nod unsure. He adds, power doesn't last, but influence sinks. It burrows. That night you dream of maps, but not drawn on paper, etched into stone, written in tongues you don't speak, shared through handshakes, treaties, silences held just long enough to matter. And you realize, this is what Musa's hajj truly did. It sent Mali out like breath, and now the world is inhaling. You wake to drums again. This time they're celebratory. A new alliance has formed. A new madrasa has opened. A scribe has just completed the 10th copy of a manuscript. Musa dictated himself a reflection on wealth leadership and the art of listening without interrupting. You sit beneath a tamarind tree, eating roasted maize, and watch the city move around you. It no longer feels like a place. It feels like a pattern. And Musa, he walks through it with bare feet, leaving no trace and yet shaping everything. There's something different about the way Musa walks now. It's not slower exactly, but each step feels heavier, like he's treading through thicker time, like every footprint is carrying not just his weight, but the weight of Mali's memory stitched into each toe print, pressed softly into the earth behind him. You notice it in the way people watch him too. Before they looked with awe, now they look with recognition, as if he's no longer the miracle who returned from Mecca, but the man who stayed. The one who wrote policies and prayers in the same ink, who fed the hungry and then asked them how it tasted. In the palace, the walls have grown more quiet. You pass chambers once filled with scribes, now silent, but for the soft turning of scrolls. You peek into a room where a golden astrolabe sits unused, its shadow pointing at nothing in particular. Musa sits on a low cushion studying a chart. You ask what it is. He replies, rainfall, it's late. Outside the skies have stayed too bright for too long. The earth is cracking. The millet bends before it's tall enough to be proud. Goats are leaner. People ask fewer questions, not because they have answers, but because they've learned to wait. The empire is breathing more shallowly now. You ride with Musa to a village near the river. Not a ceremony, not a tour, just a visit. The river is low. Children play in the shallows, but their mothers watch the sky instead of them. A woman greets the king without bowing. Her eyes are clear, her shoulders squared, her hands stained from dye pots that haven't been full in weeks. Musa greets her gently. They speak of grain, of water, of what won't grow. She says, your gold can't feed us. He nods. Then we'll find what can. That evening he gathers farmers, weavers, traders and teachers. Not to lecture, but to ask. What are we forgetting, he says. A boy speaks. We forget that goats eat everything. Laughter, relief, but also truth. They talk long into the night. Of storage, of planting methods, of how sometimes the answer is not more but less done better. Historians still argue how much Musa prepared Mali for climate change. But in that circle, you hear something deeper than policy. You hear care, and you realize kingship to him is not a crown. It's a conversation. You return to Timbuktu and sense it too. The energy is shifting. Markets still buzz, but with quieter tension. Students still study, but with a new urgency. People are storing more grain, repeating prayers a little louder. Musa convenes his inner circle, not to panic, to plan. They discuss trade routes, what still flows, what dries up, who owes what, who needs what. Musa listens to every voice. Even Sori, who still claims he's just here for the goats, though, now he commands one of the most efficient border patrols in the empire. You pass through the palace garden. The mango trees bloom weekly. The fountain trickles. And Musa is there planting something. A date seed. You ask why. He says they take 100 years to grow. You frown. Will anyone remember it was you? He smiles. That's not the point. In the coming weeks he speaks more softly. He walks less, sits more, but his thoughts faster than ever. He dictates letters to distant rulers, some you've never heard of. Invites scholars you didn't know existed. Approves a new network of granaries to be built by the river. And then he rests. Not retirement, just a breath. He sits in the mosque one evening as sunset paints gold across the walls. You sit beside him. He says we used to count gold, now we count time. He chuckles. I like this better. He closes his eyes, says nothing for a long while, then opens them and adds, but I still miss the noise of Cairo. You laugh. He doesn't. He just watches the last light leave the courtyard. And you understand. He sees it coming, not the end, but the shift, from presence to echo. You rise, you leave him there for now, wrapped in prayer and memory and sunset. And Mali carries on, not smaller, just quieter, but deeper, like the roots of a date palm whose fruit no one will eat for 100 years. You're woken in the middle of the night by silence, not the comforting kind, not the lull of sleeping markets or distant prayers, but a silence that feels like something just left the room and took the air with it. You rise and walk through the palace. No one speaks, not even the guards. The lamps still burn, the rugs are still warm underfoot, but the hush tells you what no one dares to say yet. Mansa Musa is ill. You're not summoned, but you go anyway. In a private chamber, surrounded by thick curtains and bowls of burning myrrh, Musa lies with his hands folded over his chest, a cloth dampened across his brow. His breathing is steady but slow, as if each inhale is being weighed against a lifetime of decisions. His physician, an elder with fingers stained from herbs, waves you forward. He asked for quiet, he says. So you sit. The room smells of mint and wet earth. A copy of the Quran rests on a small platform beside him, its corner folded softly, like it too is waiting. For days he drifts in and out. Sometimes he mutters names of cities of his sons of poems you don't know. Other times he simply stares at the ceiling, eyes wide, as if watching maps rearrange themselves. And in between, he remembers. He tells a story of a goat that once followed him through a prayer circle in Mecca and wouldn't leave until he sang to it. He tells you he once dropped a gold coin into a well by accident and made the entire village believe the water was blessed. He tells you quietly that sometimes when he walked barefoot, it wasn't devotion. It was because his sandals were just too tight. You laugh. He does too. Barely. And then he sleeps. Outside the palace adjusts. Ministers whisper. Couriers run. The city holds its breath the way a river might hold ice. But Musa wakes again and calls for one thing, a scroll. You bring it, and he begins to dictate. It isn't a will, it isn't a decree, it's a letter. To the future, he says. He speaks slowly as if he knows every word has to carry weight across centuries. I was not the wealth, he begins. I was its witness. I was not the empire. I was the man asked to keep it warm until the sun changed. I walked not to be seen, but so Mali would be. He pauses. Then, and if you are reading this, remember gold is not power. Gold is the shadow of where kindness has passed. He signs it with a thumbprint. You press sand over it to dry the ink. He watches. Give it to the next one, he says. Not all at once. And closes his eyes. You leave the room not because you want to, but because the silence asks you to. In the days that follow, Musa stays in bed. But the city moves. Not in panic, in preparation. Architects bring new mosque plans. The scholars draft treaties they hope won't need revision. Grain storehouses are checked twice, then sealed. And the people, they whisper his name the way you whisper a song that's almost over. One night he calls for his sandals. You bring them. They're old, cracked. The copper stitching long dulled, but he holds them like treasure. I walked far, he murmurs. I want to feel it again. So you place them on his feet. He doesn't rise, but he smiles, as if that was enough. You sleep beside the doorway, and sometime before dawn the candles flicker, and the silence deepens. You know, Mansa Musa has walked his last road, and Mali doesn't cry. It kneels. Across cities, people wash their feet before prayer. Across deserts, caravans pause to pour gold dust into the sand. Across riverbanks, children scratch spirals into mud with their toes. And in Timbuktu, a scroll is quietly sealed, to be opened when someone brave enough dares to rule with a whisper. And your heart? Your heart holds a new shape now, because you did not just walk beside a king. You helped carry a crown made of shadow silence and golden dust. Musa's funeral is not loud. It does not echo with trumpets or drown in gold. No coins are tossed, no crowds are forced to bow. There is no parade, no royal decree read from balconies. Instead, there is a silence so thick that it seems to stitch the air shut. Timbuktu wakes slowly the next day. The call to prayer sounds softer, like the muezzin doesn't want to disturb the earth. Shops open, but with half-rolled awnings. Scholars gather in clusters, but they read in murmurs. And children stop asking questions just for a moment, because Mansa Musa is gone, and Mali knows it. You walk to the mosque just as the sun rises warm and golden and strangely shy. The courtyard is full, men and women pressed shoulder to shoulder, heads bowed. In the center, beneath a sheet of simple white cloth, lies the man who carried empires in the curl of his fingers. They say he walked farther than anyone. They say his feet never grew tired. They say if you placed every scroll he funded end to end, they'd reach Cairo and back again. They say so many things. But you remember his laughter when a goat stole his prayer rug. You remember the curve of his finger tracing lines in the dust. You remember that he once told you the best kind of rule is the kind you don't have to speak aloud. The prayer begins. It rolls over the courtyard like water over stone. It doesn't crash. It cleanses. One verse, then another, until it feels like even the birds are holding their wings still. Afterward, there's no speech, just a simple act. People begin placing coins, small ones, not Musa's heavy golden slabs at the base of the mosque. Not as offerings, as memories. Each coin a story, each glint a sigh. You find yourself walking to the library. Inside, a scribe is already at work, not weeping, writing. He turns to you and says, "We have to finish the record of his reign." You ask who gave that order. He shrugs, "No one." And that's when you understand. This empire, it remembers itself, not because of fear, because of love. You wander to the outer fields where workers harvest slowly. One man pauses to show a child how to thresh grain with the rhythm of a poem. A girl recites lines from a scroll she can barely hold. A teacher asks her to say it again, but slower. In the far distance, a new caravan arrives. Traders from the east. They've heard the news. One brings a letter of condolence. Another asks to see the mosque. The last one, quiet pale from desert sun, only says, "Is it true he turned Cairo gold?" You smile. No, he turned it quiet. You spend that evening among the rooftops. The city glows gently, the lanterns flickering like fireflies who know how to mourn. Sori finds you. He's no longer pretending to be just a goat herder. He's got a ledger now, an armband, a whisper of command in the way he breathes. He named a successor, he says. You raise an eyebrow. He left a note, no name, just one sentence. Let the one who listens best lead next. You exhale. That'll take some time. Sori nods, that's the point. And in the days that follow, you see what Musa left behind, not in gold, but in questions. Children argue about poetry in the market. Scribes debate trade policy in the shade of a tamarind tree. An old woman slaps a would-be thief across the face and tells him Musa didn't raise us to beg in shadows. The mosque stands firm. The schools hum louder. The city breathes not as it did before, but deeper. And beneath the clay his sandals remain, buried with care. A spiral carved into the soul. Not an end, a return. And you find yourself walking again. Not away from Musa, but forward with him. Because when a king like that dies, he doesn't disappear. He spreads into the dust, into the ink, into the parts of you that now remember how it feels to walk with purpose. The city doesn't name the day he died. They don't carve it into stone, don't seal it in scrolls. They just begin calling everything after it something new. Children born in the weeks following are said to have Musa's eyes. Musa's quiet, Musa's heat beneath the skin. Markets refer to prices in the rain that followed. Scribes start writing margins differently, more generous, as if each word now deserves more breathing room. And you walk differently now too. You stop where he would have stopped. You speak the way he did, with just enough silence left between words that people have time to think. One morning you visit the sandal maker, the same one who once carved that perfect spiral into the soul. She's older now, her hands more cracked than cured. She's working on something. You ask what? A walking stick, she says, not for leaning, for pointing. She lifts it, long, carved from baobab wood, the top inlaid with copper swirls. Someone's got to keep the path straight. She doesn't say Musa's name. She doesn't have to. You walk to the granaries. The doors are sealed for the season grain, packed tight and high. A boy sits atop a basket, humming a song that sounds suspiciously like a prayer disguised as a joke. He tells you Musa once said millet keeps better than gold. You nod. He asks, but do stories keep? You think about it, and reply only if someone's hungry for them. Later you help wash scrolls. Yes, wash. The ink won't run. It's pressed too deep into the parchment, but dust settles in every corner. So scholars wash the scrolls with vinegar and patience. One girl dries each one in the sun and sings a verse for every crease. You ask her what she's singing. His footsteps, she says. A caravan leaves the city the next day, headed for Walata. 40 camels, no gold. Just books, wrapped in cloth, bound in memory. You stand at the gate to see them off. One traveler thanks you for walking with Musa. You say, I didn't walk with him. He let me follow. But the traveler shakes his head. No, you kept him walking. The caravan vanishes into dust, and you return to the garden. The date tree he planted, nothing but a soft curl of green pushing through soil. A child waters it. A woman shades it with her scarf. No one speaks, but the whole city is rooting now. At night the stars are clearer, not because they've changed, because you have. You lie awake, listening to the mosque breathe, listening to the pages whisper in their shelves, listening to sandals creak in the quiet as early risers ready their baskets, and slowly, gently the world leans in, just to say, he walked. And because of that, so will you. Now your eyes are heavier, not because of the dust, not because of the weight of gold or maps or scrolls or cities dreamed into being, but because you've walked beside something rare, not just a king, not just a builder, but a man who believed footsteps could leave light behind, who gave away gold so he could return with questions, who built with mud so that people could live inside memory. You're still there, you know, still under that woven canopy in Timbuktu, still holding the edge of a scroll that hasn't finished unfurling, still listening to the soft hush of water in the palace garden. Musa planted one date tree, rising one fountain, trickling one city, remembering how to teach itself. Breathe in. Let it settle. Let the gold dust drift down. Let the warmth of sandalwood and sunlight and kindness seep into the folds of your pillow. Because kings like Musa don't vanish, they settle in. To libraries, to legends, to soft, slow sleep. So close your eyes. Feel your toes press lightly into the earth, and let yourself drift. You've walked far. You've listened well. And now, it's time to rest. You've walked the hajj-shaped mud into mosques, whispered treaties into the wind, and watched a golden empire root itself in memory. Sleep softly. The story will keep walking.